Are you ready to get slammed with the brutal reality of skyrocketing food prices, or would you rather keep living in a fairy tale where your grocery bill isn't about to punch you straight in the wallet? Because let me tell you, by the time 2025 rolls around, your favorite everyday products are going to cost so much, you'll wonder if you accidentally wandered into a luxury goods store. This isn't idle chatter or baseless fear-mongering. I've torn through more research reports, USDA forecasts, FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization analyses, and trade publications than I care to admit. What I uncovered should worry every single one of us who isn't rolling in cash. The crisis is real, and it's coming whether you're prepared or not. The video title says it all. These 8 grocery products will be too unaffordable to buy in 2025. But this isn't just some YouTube gimmick. I'm about to hammer you with solid facts, and you better listen up if you want any shot at protecting your bank balance in the near future. Let's start with the big picture. According to the USDA's latest published data, we've seen overall food prices rocket upward by over 28% in just the last 2 years. And that might actually underestimate the situation for some specific goods. Global inflation, extreme weather events, shipping log jams, and endless supply chain disruptions have all conspired against your basic grocery run. You think your weekly bill is bad now? Just wait. The World Bank's October 2024 Commodity Markets Outlook has signaled a grim reality. Certain staples could see price tags soar another 40% or 50%, or even higher depending on how disastrous climate events and geopolitical tensions become. That's not some random guess, it's hard data from top economists warning everyone who will listen. But enough with the broad strokes. You want the specifics, the real shockers. Let's rip through 8 separate grocery items, each of which is facing its own meltdown in supply, price, or both. And let me warn you, if you think you'll be able to casually toss these in your cart a year or 2 from now, you might have to think again, or at least take on a second job. Number 8. Tomatoes, the iconic staple of sauces, salads, and everything in between. What's more basic than a nice ripe tomato, right? Well, if you've been following the USDA's Fruit and Vegetable Cost Index, you might have noticed tomatoes creeping up in price for several years. But the fun is just beginning. California, which for decades has grown the bulk of America's processing tomatoes, the kind turned into paste, sauces, salsa, you name it, has been slammed by unprecedented drought and then, ironically, by floods that came at the worst possible times. The USDA's Economic Research Service recently reported a 15% decrease in the tomato crop volume in 2024 compared to the prior year. And while that might not seem catastrophic, it's part of a multi-year trend that's driving processors to scramble for supply. Some analysts are predicting that if water allocations in key farming regions keep getting slashed, and they will thanks to the ongoing water wars in the western states, prices for tomato-based products could skyrocket by 30% to 45% by 2025. Don't believe me? Go ahead and watch the markets. You'll see more and more headlines about tomato shortages, about farmers tearing out tomato fields and planting less water-intensive crops. It's already happening. And guess who ends up footing the bill for all that? That's right, us. If you love your pizza sauce, ketchup, or that comforting pot of homemade marinara, either learn to pay more or find something else to eat. And don't kid yourself that Mexico is going to swoop in and save the day. The Sinaloa region, which supplies a big chunk of winter tomatoes to the U.S., has had its own water management nightmares, plus a surge in shipping costs that just keeps climbing. According to Mexico's Servicio de Información Agroalimentaria y Pesquera, SIAP, production costs have spiked 25% in the last year alone. By the time you factor in border crossing delays, new import regulations, and the fact that transport costs have soared by double digits, you can see the writing on the wall. Your tomatoes are about to become a pricey luxury. Enjoy the current prices while you can, because they won't last. Number 7. Wheat products. You might not think of wheat itself as something you buy, but I guarantee you consume it daily. Bread, pasta, cereal, pastries, the works. The reason you need to care is that global wheat prices are on a steady climb, fueled by a combination of severe droughts in major producing regions like the U.S. plains, unpredictable monsoons in India, and the ripple effects of the conflict in Eastern Europe, specifically the ongoing tensions that have limited exports from Ukraine. The USDA's World Agricultural Supply and Demand Estimates, WASDE, keeps adjusting global wheat production down while consumption remains high or even higher, partly because wheat is a fundamental staple in so many countries. Guess what that means for your grocery bill? Already, if you've looked at the cost of bagels or flour-based products recently, you've seen how high it can go. But wait for 2025. Some experts from Rabobank are warning that if the current weather trends keep up, scorching temperatures in the Midwest, water shortages in the western states, disruptions in the Black Sea region, we could see U.S. wheat futures climb another 35% above today's already elevated levels. That translates into more expensive flour, which then translates into more expensive bread, pizza dough, pasta, cookies, you name it. And in case you haven't noticed, you can't exactly skip wheat if it's a cornerstone of your everyday meals. You'll likely adapt by either paying out the nose or switching to cheaper grains like sorghum or barley. Sure, you might discover new and interesting recipes that way, but don't pretend it's your first choice. It's pure survival mode for your wallet. Now here's the scary part. The biggest wheat exporters, like the U.S., Canada, Australia, Russia, and Ukraine, are all grappling with climate volatility. In 2024, Canada's prairie provinces had an intense drought that cut wheat yields drastically, driving up global prices. In Australia, it's either feast or famine, with cyclical floods or dryness crippling production. If you think this is all going to fix itself overnight, you're dreaming. These are structural issues that are going to persist, hammering the global supply of wheat and spiking your costs for anything containing flour. So buckle up because the numbers aren't looking good. Number 6. Beef. You've probably already noticed how your steaks and ground beef have become more expensive lately, and that's hardly a coincidence. The USDA's 2024 cattle inventory report showed the smallest U.S. cattle herd since the 1960s. Ranchers have been liquidating cattle in droves, largely because extended drought in states like Texas and Oklahoma has ravaged pastures, forcing them to cull herds to keep the remaining animals fed. Feed prices are through the roof, especially corn and soy, which are up due to both supply chain disruptions and the general inflationary trends we're all living through. The knock-on effect is that even fewer calves are being raised to maturity, setting the stage for an even tighter supply in the years to come. That means 2025 is poised to be the year of sticker shock in the meat section. Picture a 25 to 40% jump on some beef cuts, especially premium ones like ribeye or tenderloin. Want proof? Take a look at the Chicago Mercantile Exchange CME futures market. Prices for live cattle contracts have been on a steady upward trajectory, reflecting a shortage that is not going away anytime soon. And let's not even get started on the water issues plaguing the West and Midwest or the cost of fuel for transportation, both of which feed directly into the final price. If you're a steak lover, you might want to savor your next meal because it could become a once-in-a-while treat instead of a weekly affair. And don't assume poultry will bail you out. Chicken feed costs, corn and soy, have soared as well, partly driven by global commodity price hikes. In fact, the poultry industry was hammered by a record avian flu outbreak that forced the culling of tens of millions of birds. All of these factors are converging to hit the entire meat aisle. Yes, you can always switch to plant-based alternatives, but guess what? Those have their own supply chain issues, plus big corporate players that don't mind jacking up prices once they see a chance to expand their margins. You won't escape the upward trend in protein costs by just swapping one meat for another. Number 5. Brace yourself for a bombshell. The cost of bananas might be about to blow your mind. I know bananas. The cheap, humble fruit you've been tossing into your cart without a second thought for years is now on shaky ground. Bananas are grown primarily in tropical regions, Ecuador, Costa Rica, Colombia, the Philippines, and these areas have been slammed by everything from hurricanes to volcanic ash to pandemics that disrupt labor availability. But here's the bigger reason bananas might hit you harder: a devastating fungal disease known as Fusarium wilt. Tropical Race 4 is decimating banana plantations across the globe. TR4 is lethal to the Cavendish banana variety, the one you eat 99% of the time, and it's spreading at an alarming rate. According to a 2024 report from Bioversity International, TR4 has already caused billions of dollars in losses, and the disease continues to pop up in new regions every year. Once TR4 infects the soil, there's essentially no cure. Plantations often have to be abandoned. Some major banana exporters are frantically trying to breed resistant varieties, but that's not a fast process. Global production is expected to fall behind global demand by a growing margin. Add the logistical fiascos, fuel costs, shipping container shortages, port bottlenecks, and you get a perfect storm that's going to pummel banana prices. What might that look like on your end? Analysts at FAO suggest a scenario where the average retail price of bananas could jump by 50% or more by 2025 if TR4 continues its spread unchecked. That 59-cent per pound bargain might soar to $1 or more a pound, and your wallet is going to notice. This is a radical shift for a fruit that has been basically cheap as dirt for decades. And because bananas are so ubiquitous, the entire consumer market will feel the strain. Sure, you can switch to apples or oranges, but guess what? Extreme weather hits them too. There might not be a magic bullet for cheap fruit in the near future. Number 4. Here's one you might not see coming. Corn. Yes, that same corn that's in everything from tortillas to breakfast cereals, not to mention the high-fructose corn syrup saturating countless processed foods. We're looking at a foundational crop that underpins a massive slice of the global food system. The USDA indicates that the U.S. is still the world's largest corn producer, with states like Iowa, Illinois, and Nebraska leading the pack. But you wouldn't believe how vulnerable even these powerhouse states have become to the whims of climate. In 2024, the Midwest swung between record rains and scorching drought conditions, messing up planting schedules and lowering yields. Meanwhile, export demand continues to rise. Developing countries rely heavily on U.S. corn as feed for livestock, as well as for direct consumption in certain regions. Then there's the ongoing tension around ethanol production. With oil prices in flux and governments pushing for greener fuels, corn-based ethanol is still in the mix, meaning a chunk of the harvest goes to fuel rather than your dinner plate. According to the Congressional Research Service, about 35% to 40% of the U.S. corn crop is used for ethanol, and that number can climb higher depending on policy incentives. Put it all together, and you have a stressed crop with multiple competing demands. That's why the Chicago Board of Trade, CBOT, futures for corn are expected to remain high or climb even higher into 2025. Analysts at CoBank predict potential double-digit percentage increases, possibly as high as 25% or 30% from today's prices, which are already elevated. Corn is the linchpin of so much of our food supply that when its price increases, it cascades through the entire system. Meat and dairy, because livestock eat corn, cereals, snack foods, sweeteners, you name it. This is the kind of multi-layered shock that can push grocery bills into the stratosphere. If you're thinking of riding out the storm, you'd better gear up because it's likely to worsen before it stabilizes. Number 3. Let's get into something that might really crush your daily routine: soybean-based products. If you're a fan of tofu, soy milk, or any number of plant-based foods, pay attention. Soybeans also feed livestock. With more and more people worldwide adopting meat-heavy diets, particularly in developing economies, global demand for soybeans as feed has shot up. At the same time, soybean oil is a major cooking staple in many parts of the world. So basically, soy is used for everything: human food, animal feed, cooking oil, biofuel. When the supply of soybeans becomes strained, you can expect a ripple effect across an enormous range of products. Brazil has overtaken the U.S. as the largest soybean exporter in recent years, but that doesn't mean you're safe. Brazil's soybean farmers have faced catastrophic droughts in the southern states, plus destructive floods in other regions. The result is yield variability that's been driving markets crazy. The USDA is already warning of tight global stocks if 2025 doesn't shape up with perfect growing conditions. Spoiler alert, we haven't had perfect conditions in quite some time, and climate change is not backing off. For the average grocery shopper, that means higher prices for plant-based staples. It also trickles down to meat, because if feed prices go up, ranchers pass that cost to you. The United Soybean Board predicted in its 2024 State of Soy report that global consumption is set to outpace production by a significant margin if these extreme weather patterns persist. Translation: you'll be paying more for tofu, more for soy milk, more for feed-based animal products, more for cooking oil, and more for anything else tethered to soy. It's a multifaceted fiasco that's not going to fix itself in the blink of an eye. Number 2. Now let's tear into the looming crisis with seafood, particularly shrimp and tilapia, two extremely common picks for those who want a break from red meat. Global aquaculture has been hailed as the solution to overfishing, but guess what? Fish farms have their own vulnerabilities. Shrimp farming in Southeast Asia has battled wave after wave of disease outbreaks, like early mortality syndrome, while also contending with rising sea temperatures and more frequent storms that damage shrimp ponds. Vietnam, Thailand, and Indonesia are major suppliers, and they've seen their fair share of disruptions that curtail output just when global demand is climbing, especially from markets like China and the European Union. Meanwhile, tilapia farming in countries like China and Egypt has faced issues ranging from water pollution to disease outbreaks. With water temperatures climbing in many regions, pathogens thrive and fish mortality rates spike. Fish feed is also heavily dependent on soy and grain prices, which, as we've just discussed, are likely to stay high or get even higher. The net effect? Seafood is no longer the cheap protein alternative it once was. According to projections from the Global Aquaculture Alliance, farm-raised shrimp prices could surge by up to 35% by 2025 if disease control measures fail to keep pace and if feed prices remain high. Tilapia might see a similar climb, especially if major producers face new health crises or if trade disputes intensify. Not a seafood eater? Think that doesn't affect you? Think again. More expensive farmed fish means more pressure on wild fish stocks, which are already near catastrophic declines in many regions thanks to overfishing and ocean warming. Everything ties together in the giant puzzle of global food supply, and if you plan to rely on seafood as your affordable fallback, you might be in for a rude awakening. Number 1. You've heard me mention climate disasters more than once here, and now I'm saving one of the biggest canaries in the coal mine for last: rice. Rice might not be a daily staple for some Americans, but for half the world, it's the main source of calories. If you like sushi, stir-fries, burritos, which often feature rice, or any kind of Asian cuisine, pay attention. India, China, Indonesia, Vietnam, and Thailand produce the lion's share of the world's rice, but shifting monsoons and unpredictable rainfall patterns have turned once reliable harvests into a coin toss. Look at India's situation in 2024. The government briefly flirted with export restrictions on certain grades of rice after a poor monsoon season threatened domestic supply. Even a whiff of that kind of policy sends global prices spiking because the market freaks out over potential shortages. On top of that, rising sea levels threaten delta regions where rice has been grown for centuries. According to a 2023 report by the International Rice Research Institute, IRRI, coastal salinity intrusion has rendered thousands of acres of rice paddies unproductive in parts of Bangladesh and Vietnam. As if that wasn't enough, extreme heat events can decimate yields by causing rice blossoms to wither. We're not talking about some theoretical scenario decades from now. This is happening right now, and it's projected to get worse. Rice prices have already climbed 20% since 2023, and the real leaps are likely coming in 2025 if these trends persist. Some experts predict an additional 30% to 40% price hike, and if major exporters decide to protect their domestic markets, that could turn into a full-blown crisis for rice importing countries. Even the U.S. sees ripple effects. Importers will pay premiums, and restaurants will pass those costs on to you. Suddenly, your favorite takeout becomes that much pricier. And given how fundamental rice is to billions of people worldwide, any supply shock can also lead to political unrest, further fueling global instability. That might sound dramatic, but we've seen it happen before with spikes in staple food prices, triggering protests and even government overthrows. So there you have it. 8 categories of food that stand on the brink of becoming borderline unaffordable by 2025, if not sooner. The real question: is there anything you can do about it, or are you just a sitting duck waiting to get roasted by the next wave of price hikes? Look, I'm not going to pretend you can single-handedly alter global weather patterns or fix broken supply chains, but you can still take some proactive steps to shield yourself, at least partially, from the worst of this onslaught. First, consider diversifying your diet. Over-reliance on a handful of staple foods can be financially hazardous when prices spike. Try incorporating alternative grains, oats, barley, quinoa, especially if they're locally sourced in your region. Look into beans, lentils, or chickpeas for protein if meat prices push that T-bone steak out of reach. And if you've got the space and the means, dabble in home gardening. Tomatoes, herbs, and peppers can all be grown in small plots or even containers. You won't be self-sufficient, but every little bit you grow yourself is food you're not buying at inflated market rates. Second, stock up when you see deals. Shelf-stable products like rice, dried beans, flour, and canned tomatoes can be purchased in bulk when prices are temporarily low. Yes, that requires some storage space and upfront expense, but if you've got the room and the budget, you can lock in a lower price today rather than rolling the dice on 2025's possibly insane cost structure. Just make sure to rotate your stock and use it before it goes stale. Third, keep an eye on local farmers' markets. Sometimes, especially if you're in a region with robust local agriculture, you can find better deals than at big box grocery stores, which have multiple layers of markup. Building relationships with local farmers might also open the door to bulk purchasing or CSA subscriptions. It's not a silver bullet, but it's often a smarter way to spend your money than just passively swallowing corporate price hikes. Fourth, think about freezer real estate. The more space you have, the more you can buy in bulk and preserve. Meat, veggies, and even some fruits freeze fairly well, letting you ride out short-term price spikes. Of course, the electricity cost is a factor, but if prices truly explode, a stocked freezer might look like the smartest investment you ever made. Fifth, pay attention to new technologies and products. We're on the cusp of a wave of innovations like lab-grown meat and genetically modified crops that promise higher yields and greater resilience. Whether or not you're personally comfortable with them is your call, but these technologies might become increasingly common as food scarcity bites. Already, companies like Upside Foods for cell-based poultry and various startups pushing gene-edited grains are gaining traction. If these options hit the mainstream, they could be your wallet's lifeline, assuming prices don't get jacked up by big corporations. Sixth, don't underestimate the power of collective action and policy. Yes, I know it sounds corny, but it's the truth. If you're tired of seeing half your paycheck eaten up by grocery bills, you can't ignore the political factors at play. Government policies on agriculture, energy, water rights, and international trade all shape these price trends. Paying attention, voting, and advocating for changes, such as supporting local farmers, encouraging sustainable water use, or demanding fairer trade deals, can move the needle over time. Seventh, get savvy with your cooking skills. Knowing how to whip up a filling meal from cheaper staple ingredients can drastically cut your food costs. If wheat-based pasta becomes too expensive, do you know how to make a hearty meal from lentils, beans, or cheaper grains? Can you adapt recipes so that a small amount of pricier meat or cheese goes a longer way? Learning to cook from scratch is a tried-and-true money saver, and in an era of surging food prices, it might just become essential. And finally, adopt the mindset that nothing is guaranteed. The days of blindly trusting that you can always pop into a store and pick up cheap bananas, tomatoes, or coffee might be behind us. This doesn't mean life is doomed to misery, but it does mean you've got to stay alert. Watch markets, track weather events, and pay close attention to your local grocery store price tags. We're entering a period of volatility unlike anything we've seen in recent decades. But hey, maybe you're the type who needs a jolt of harsh reality to take action. If so, consider this your alarm bell, siren, and emergency alert all wrapped in one. Everything I've outlined here, the climate disruptions, the supply chain snarls, the skyrocketing feed and fuel costs, none of it shows signs of spontaneously fixing itself. If anything, these dynamics might accelerate. So the question isn't whether these 8 items will be too expensive to buy, it's which one is going to break your budget first. Are you going to watch passively as your monthly grocery bill balloon from $400 to $600 or $700? Or are you going to wise up, get strategic, and claw back a little bit of control over your food expenses? Look, I can't decide for you. But if you've made it this far, you at least know what's coming, and that knowledge is priceless. Most people will sleepwalk into 2025 and wonder what hit them. You don't have to be one of them. You can plan, you can store, you can shift your diet, you can lobby for saner policies, and you can pounce on deals when they come around. The tools are there, but it's up to you to use them. Before you run off, do yourself a favor. Subscribe if you haven't, turn on your notifications, and share this video with a friend who's also sick of creeping food prices. I've got more research in the pipeline that dives deeper into each of these categories, plus updates on new shocks coming down the line. Trust me, you don't want to be caught off guard when the next wave of chaos hits your local store shelves. With the knowledge you've gained here, you can prepare instead of panic. In the meantime, drop a comment if you've got a tip for dealing with rising food costs. Maybe you found a local farmer who sells in bulk at a discount, or you've discovered an amazing method to preserve produce at home. Whatever it is, let's pool our knowledge. Because like it or not, we're all in this together, and the more informed and proactive we are, the better our chances of weathering this storm. Good luck out there, and don't say you weren't warned when 2025's grocery prices come knocking.